Nedarim Daf the Gemara is discussing machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim, how hefker works. The Gemara is going to see how this applies to a brisa, which seems to be contradictory as to whether it's Rabbi Yossi or the Rabbanan. The Gemara will give a couple of answers to try to explain it. So let's see the machlokes. We've already seen the machlokes earlier between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. What happens when you're mafker something? According to Rabbi Yossi, it stays your possession midaraisa. It's yours until the other person comes and is zocha it. According to the Rabbanan, as soon as you're mafker, you divest yourself of ownership, it remains ownerless. And when somebody else comes in and takes it, then he becomes the owner. Now, this is very relevant to the halacha of meiser. The halacha is that if you have property which was hefker, became hefker at any time, you're zocha to it in hefker, it is not chayiv and meiser. There's a gzeres hakasav, the Gemara learns it out, not in this Masechta, in Maseches Shabbos. It says v'nishmar, to exclude hefker, that you're not chayiv meiser something which is hefker. Now, the Gemara introduces a brisa where the first part of the brisa seems to fit with the Rabbanan, and the second part seems to fit with Rabbi Yossi. So let's begin the brisa. So the brisa discusses what happens if somebody is mafkir his field and then he wants to take possession of the field again. Is it chayiv and meiser or not? So the brisa says as follows: for the first 3 days, he certainly took possession of the field back. He undid what he did, and it's not like it was ever hefker at all. And the reason for this, the Gemara explains a little further into the daf, is that people were trying to play tricks and make themselves not chayiv and meiser by being mafkir the field and taking it back. In order to prevent this from happening, we established the halacha that hefker does not take effect on the field to pater it from meiser until 3 days after you're mafker it. Once 3 days have gone by, a person who was planning on being mafker and taking it back in order to play tricks would not leave it for longer than 3 days, so therefore you could assume there's no trick being played here. Now, is this halacha d'oraisa or midrabanan? So the Gemara explains later, according to Rabbi Yossi, midoraisa, the hefker doesn't take effect until somebody else is kona it. So we're talking here when no one's kona it, d'oraisa remains yours, and there's no tour from meiser until 3 days have gone by. We'll have to explain why, when 3 days have gone by, does it leave you rishus, and Rabbi Yossi will say that's a takana midrabanan. Now, according to the Rabbanan, however, it leaves you rishus right away, and therefore me'ikar adin, it should be pater from meiser as soon as you mafkir it. But the Rabbanan said halacha that it's considered to be that it stays in your rishus for the first 3 days. It's not considered to have left your rishus. It doesn't have a patur meiser, and until 3 days have gone by, then we're not afraid of this trick being played anymore, and then it leaves your rishos as the din daraisa should be. So the fact that it stays in your rishos for the first 3 days is a machlok. It's part of this machlokes. It's the opposite of what it would have been otherwise. According to Rabbi Yossi, that is the din daraisa. According to the Rabbanan, that is the din derabanan. Now, the brisa says, therefore, the halacha is if somebody wants to backtrack, wants to undo what he was mafkir, he can. Within 3 days, everybody agrees he can do that, either deraisa or derabanan, depending who you hold like. But he's allowed to undo it because it was still in his rishos all along, and as long as it was in his rishos, he can undo it. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi, that's deraisa. It was in his rishos. So according to the Rabbanan, it wasn't really in his rishos. However, the Rabbanan's takana makes it as if it was in his rishos. If we want to say that it wasn't hefker yet from meiser, we also have to say that he can be chayzer on it. Otherwise, people would not accept that there's no patur of meiser. They would keep the patur for meiser anyway, because how are you telling me that I can't take it back because it's out of my rishos? Then obviously there's a patur of meiser. That has to be. Now, the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa is as follows. The Reisha says, what happens after 3 days? After 3 days, you cannot take it back anymore. And the implication is, it doesn't matter if somebody's taken possession of it or not. As soon as 3 days have gone by, it's out of your rishos. That clearly sounds like the Rabbanan, who say, even without somebody else coming to take possession, it leaves your rishos. Now, the Seifa, however, says that if somebody's mafkir for a certain time, he says it's mafkir for a day, it's hefker for a week, it's hefker for a year, it's hefker for a month, it's hefker for 7 years, whatever it is, if he limits the time, then it depends. You need someone else to come take possession of it for it to leave his rishos. As long as no one else takes possession of it, it still stays in rishos. Once someone else takes possession of it, now it leaves the mafkir's rishos. That is clearly Rabbi Yossi. So the question is the contradiction between the Reish and the Seifa, whether it's Rabbi Yossi or not. So the Gemara is going to answer both ways. So Ula says it's all the Rabbanan. I understand the ratio why it leaves your rishos as soon as the 3 days are up, because that's how hefker works. Why in the Seifa does it not leave your rishos until somebody else is koned? Gemara says, well, since he limited the hefker, he didn't say it's permanently hefker. He said it's hefker for a limited time. Therefore, he obviously is loath to get rid of it. He wants to hold on to it, kind of. He's not really ready to let it go. He's mafkir for a certain time. There's actually a discussion amongst the Rishonim. If somebody comes in and he's zoche in it during that time, does he take possession of it or not, or does it go back? But he's clearly trying to hold on to it, and therefore he's limiting his hefker. If he's doing that, he's holding on to possession until someone else comes in and takes it. And therefore, in that case, the Rabbanan agree that it stays in his rishus until he's mafker, because he didn't really mean to say it's hefker. He meant to say it's available for the taking. When somebody will come and take it, then it'll transfer to that person's rishus. Now, Reish Lakish has a different shot. Reish Lakish says that it's all Rabbi Yosi. If it's all Rabbi Yosi in the Reisha, how come after 3 days pass, it automatically leaves your Rishos? So Reish Lakish says that's Derabanan. And the reason is because people were forgetting that it really becomes Hefker, your Mafkirit, and that it loses its Chiyav Meiser. So what's happening is that the Rabbanan were Matakein, that it stays in your Rishos for 3 days, and you could be Chayzer. Then if somebody else comes and he's Kona it, people started thinking that, hey, it's like a gift. It goes directly from one Rishos to the other Rishos. It's never hefker, and therefore it's chayiv and meiser. And people were treating it as if it's chayiv and meiser doiraisa, which it's not, because doiraisa it was really hefker. It was only midrabanan at all. They had to hold on to it for 3 days. It is chayiv meiser midra. It is putter and meiser midaraisa. So therefore, the Rabbanan made a rule. It leaves your rishus right away after 3 days, and it's not how it usually. It's not how hefker usually works. But here we made a rule that it's completely hefker. It leaves your rishus after 3 days. You can't be chayzer once 3 days are up. Therefore, people understood that the person who comes and takes it is kona from hefker, and it's putter from meiser. Gemara now asks though, but now you're creating a different problem, because what happens if the guy is chayzer? So guy is chayzer, so midaraisa, what's the halacha? Midaraisa was never hefker according to Rabbi Yosi, because it was in his rishos until somebody else is kona it. Nobody else is kona. This guy is chayzer, so midaraisa it stays his. However, the Rabbanan said that it's not his. The Rabbanan took it away after 3 days. That means if somebody else comes later and wants to be kona it, the Rabbanan are going to give it to that guy, because they said the first guy can't be chayzer. It's not his. It's not his possession. His hefker kicked in. Midrabanan only. Now, this person who's going to be receiving it, what does he have here? This piece of fruits that he now has, midoraisa, belong to the original owner, and midrabanan they gave it to him. Now, midoraisa, therefore, they were never hefker, the chayv and meiser, because the guy was chayzer on the hefker. Midrabanan, they go to the second guy, and the second guy thinks this that I got it must be that it was real hefker, because the Rabbanan are giving it to me. Why then are they telling me that I have to take meiser from it? Obviously, they are going to take it. They are going to tell me I have to take meiser from it, because their rice, it's chayv and meiser, was never hefker. So why are they telling me I have to take meiser from it? It must be it's meiser midrabanan, and therefore he's going to end up using it for meiser derabanan. Either he'll be mafresh this on other things that are chayv derabanan, like if it's a flower pot without a hole, or he'll be mafresh on a flower pot with a hole on this. Either way, he's going to use it as meiser derabanan, but it's not. It's meiser deraisa. He thinks it's meiser derabanan because they gave it to him midrabanan, and it was hefker. However, it's really chayv meiser deraisa because it still belongs to the original owner deraisa. The Rabbanan just took it away from him, but it was never hefker. So therefore, you have a situation where a person thinks it's derabanan and it's really chayv meiser deraisa. So you can have a problem there. So the Gemara says so. They will tell him without confusing him. They will tell him you have to take meiser in and of itself. You can't take meiser on this to any other fruits, or from any other fruits on this, and that way it'll make sure that it'll only be derabanan on derabanan and not anything else. The Gemara now has a kasha from another brisa, which the Gemara assumes is of the same authorship as this one. The other brisa says if somebody's mafkir his vineyard, and the next morning he gets up and he takes possession of it, he starts picking the grapes. So he's chayiv in peret, oilus, and chikha, and peya, meaning that it does not have the status of hefker as far as that's concerned, but it's putter from meiser. As far as meiser goes, we consider it to be hefker, and therefore it's putter from meiser. The first question is, why is it putter from meiser? The guy came and took it back. Says the Gemara, I understand according to Ula that our brisa was derabanan, and therefore this is also derabanan. And Ula's explanation is that the brisa was the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan hold that the way hefker works is that it leaves his rishos. So deraisa, it is hefker. The Rabbanan are the ones who said that it's not hefker because they want to make sure that there's no games being played. So then I understand over here when we say that it's putter deraisa, because deraisa it is real hefker. And it's the brisa here will agree that it's still chayev midaraisa. However, according to Reish Lakish, that the previous brisa is Rav Yosi. So this is also Rav Yosi. So according to Rav Yosi, it's in the original person's rishos, and it's taken away from him by the Chachamim and given to the second person. So deraisa, it's not considered to be hefker at all at any time. in the Rabbanan, it's also not going to be. So how do you understand? What does this brisa mean when it says it's pater from Meiser? Why should ever be pater from Meiser? Deraisa, it's chayav, and the Rabbanan didn't change that. They maybe changed how the hefker works, but they didn't change the fact that it's chayav and Meiser. So the Gemara gives two answers. The Gemara's first answer is that Rish Lakish will say that this brisa is different than the previous brisa. Previous brisa is Rav Yaisi. This brisa is the Rabbanan. The Gemara's second answer is that there's a difference how many people saw you being mafkirit. And it's only hefker deraisa if 3 people saw the hefker happen. And the Gemara quotes a discussion on that subject, and now we're ready in Daf Mem Hey. The Gemara says that Rav Yochanan said name Rav Shimon ben Yehutzadok, in order to be mafker something deraisa, you have to have 3 people seeing it, so that if one person takes it, the other 2 can be witnesses to that. If there are only 2 people who see, it's not hefker deraisa. So here, when we say that it is hefker, and it's pater, talking about where 3 people saw, but before we're talking about only 2 people saw. Now Yeshua ben Levi says, Do'iraisa, even if one person sees something, it becomes hefker. In fact, you need 3 people to see. Is only a takana, Nedarim that you should have witnesses around if one of them decides to be mafker. This ends the 4th parak of the Masechta and the first half of Daf Mem Hey.